The black dress caught the dust from the platform as Rose Watson stepped down from the train, her veil lifting slightly in the dry Nevada wind, revealing eyes that had forgotten how to shine. She clutched a small carpetbag in one hand and a crumpled letter in the other, the words nearly worn away from repeated readings during the long journey west to Coloma in this year of our Lord, 1878. Kyle Yates stood at the edge of the platform, hat in his hands, his weathered face creased with concern as he watched the woman in mourning descend. This was not what he had expected. The letters they had exchanged over the past 6 months had mentioned nothing of death or loss. He had written to her of his ranch, of the mountains that surrounded his valley, of the cattle that grazed on his land, and the simple but comfortable house he had built with his own 2 hands. She had written back with careful penmanship about her life in Philadelphia, about her work at a textile factory, about her dreams of a different life under wider skies. Neither had mentioned love, but there had been warmth in those letters, a tentative hope that perhaps they might build something good together. Now she stood before him draped in black crepe, her face pale beneath the dark veil, and Kyle felt his heart constrict with unexpected emotion. Whatever had brought her to this state of mourning, she had still come. That took a kind of courage he could not help but admire. "Miss Watson," he said softly, stepping forward, "I'm Kyle Yates." Rose looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met. His were brown, warm despite the concern in them, set in a face that spoke of long days in the sun and hard work honestly done. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands that twisted the brim of his hat nervously. Something about his gentle expression made the tight knot in her chest loosen just slightly. "Mr. Yates," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. She had barely spoken to anyone during the journey. "I apologize for my appearance. I should have written to explain, but I—" She faltered, the words catching in her throat. "You don't owe me any explanations right now," Kyle said gently. "You must be exhausted from your travels. Let me get your trunk and we'll head out to the ranch. There's a hot meal waiting and a clean bed. Everything else can wait." She blinked at him, surprised by his kindness. In Philadelphia, after the funeral, people had offered platitudes and uncomfortable sympathy, but mostly they had avoided her. Death made people uncomfortable. Loss was something to be hidden away, not acknowledged. But this man, this stranger who she had agreed to marry sight unseen, looked at her with nothing but compassion. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. Kyle drove the wagon with practiced ease, pointing out landmarks as they went. There was the old mining office from when Coloma had been a boom town during the silver strikes. There was the general store owned by Martha and Henry Collins, good people who would welcome her warmly. There was the church, small but well-maintained, where Reverend Thomas held services every Sunday. Rose listened but said little, watching the landscape unfold around her. The mountains rose up in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warmth of late spring. The valley spread out in shades of green and gold, crossed by a river that sparkled in the afternoon sun. It was nothing like Philadelphia, with its crowded streets and smoke-stained buildings. Here the sky seemed to go on forever. "Your letters mentioned you enjoyed reading," Kyle said after a long stretch of silence. "I'm not much of a reader myself, but I had the school teacher in town help me pick out some books for the house. She thought you might like them." That was very thoughtful, Rose managed, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I want you to be comfortable," Kyle said simply. "I know this is not how either of us imagined things would start, but I hope you'll find a home here in time." Those words, spoken with such sincerity, made Rose's eyes burn with the tears she had been holding back for weeks. She turned her face away, looking out at the passing landscape until she had regained her composure. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was larger than Rose had expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There were flower boxes beneath the windows, though they were empty now. A barn stood nearby, freshly painted, and beyond that were corrals where horses grazed peacefully. "I built the house 5 years ago," Kyle explained as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "It has 3 bedrooms upstairs and a good kitchen. The bedroom on the east side gets the morning sun. I thought you might like that one." Rose understood what he was saying without him having to spell it out. Separate rooms, no expectations. Relief flooded through her, followed by a twinge of guilt. This man had sent money for her passage, had arranged everything, had welcomed a stranger into his home, and she was relieved to be away from him. But Kyle seemed to sense none of this. He simply helped her down from the wagon with gentle hands and carried her trunk inside, showing her to the room he had prepared. It was simple but clean, with a large bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a chair by the window. The empty flower box was just outside, and beyond it was a view of the mountains that took her breath away. "I'll let you rest," Kyle said from the doorway. "There's water in the pitcher for washing. Come down when you're ready and I'll heat up some supper." After he left, Rose sank down onto the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of everything that had brought her here. Her brother Daniel, her only family, dead at 23 from a fever that had burned through him in 3 short days. The tiny apartment they had shared, suddenly too large and too expensive for her wages alone. The future she had imagined, taking care of him until he finished his apprenticeship and could take care of her in turn, dissolved like morning mist. She had been desperate when she answered Kyle's advertisement in the newspaper. Mail-order brides were common enough, but she had never imagined herself as one. Yet what choice did she have? Stay in Philadelphia and work herself to death in the factory? Try to find another position as a domestic servant? She had no prospects, no family, no hope. Then Kyle's first letter had arrived, written in a careful hand that spoke of effort and education hard won. He had not made grand promises or flowery declarations. He had simply told her about his life and asked about hers. Over the months of correspondence, she had begun to think that perhaps she might find something resembling peace in Nevada. Not happiness, perhaps. She was not sure she remembered what that felt like. But peace and safety and a place to belong. She had meant to write and tell him about Daniel's death, about the mourning she would be wearing. But the words would not come. Every time she tried to put pen to paper, she found herself unable to explain the enormity of her loss to someone who had never met her brother, who could not understand what Daniel had meant to her. So she had simply packed her black dresses, boarded the train, and come west with her grief wrapped around her like a shroud. Now, sitting in this unfamiliar room in this unfamiliar house, Rose wondered what she had gotten herself into. But she was too tired to worry about it tonight. She washed her face, unpinned her hair, and lay down on the bed just for a moment. She woke to the smell of cooking and the soft golden light of late afternoon. For a moment she was disoriented, then memory returned. She was in Nevada, in Kyle Yates' house. She was supposed to become his wife. Rose stood and tidied herself as best she could, repinning her hair and straightening her black dress. Then, with a deep breath for courage, she went downstairs. Kyle was in the kitchen, stirring something in a large pot on the stove. He had changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was damp as though he had washed at the pump outside. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of beef stew and fresh bread. "I hope you don't mind simple fare," he said when he noticed her. "I'm a decent enough cook, but nothing fancy." "It smells wonderful," Rose said honestly. Her stomach reminded her that she had barely eaten during the journey. They sat at the table, and Kyle served the stew with thick slices of bread and butter. For a while they ate in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable one. Rose found herself relaxing slightly, the warmth of the food and the room seeping into her bones. "Will you tell me about it?" Kyle asked finally, his voice gentle. "You don't have to, but sometimes it helps to talk." Rose set down her spoon, surprised to find that she wanted to tell him. Maybe it was because he was still essentially a stranger, someone who had not known Daniel and therefore could not pity her in that awful, cloying way that her neighbors in Philadelphia had. Or maybe it was simply that Kyle's brown eyes held such genuine compassion that she found herself trusting him despite barely knowing him. "My brother Daniel died 6 weeks ago," she said quietly. "A fever. It came on suddenly, and by the time the doctor came, there was nothing to be done. He was 23 years old. He was all the family I had left." Kyle reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a simple gesture of comfort. His hand was warm and rough with calluses, solid and real. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's a terrible loss. No wonder you came dressed in mourning. I wish I had known. I would have offered to postpone your journey to give you time." "I did not want to postpone," Rose said. "There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia. The apartment we shared was too expensive for my wages alone. I could not bear to go back to the factory every day knowing I would come home to an empty room. So I came west as we had planned. I hope that does not disappoint you." "Disappoint me?" Kyle shook his head. "Rose, you traveled halfway across the country alone in mourning to meet a man you've never seen. That shows more courage than I can rightly express. I'm honored that you came. I meant what I said earlier. I want you to be comfortable here. There's no rush for anything. We can wait to get married until you're ready. We can wait for everything until you're ready." Something in Rose's chest, something that had been held tight and rigid since Daniel's death, began to ease. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the following days, Kyle was true to his word. He made no demands on her, expected nothing except that she eat regular meals and rest when she needed to. He showed her around the ranch, introducing her to his horses and cattle, pointing out where the best views were and where the wildflowers would bloom when summer fully arrived. Rose found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life almost despite herself. She woke to the sound of Kyle moving quietly through the house in the pre-dawn darkness, heading out to tend to the animals. She would dress and come downstairs to find coffee already made and the stove warm. Sometimes she would make breakfast, surprised to find herself taking pleasure in the simple domesticity of cooking eggs and frying bacon in the large, well-equipped kitchen. Kyle always thanked her for the meals with sincere appreciation, and sometimes over breakfast he would tell her about his plans for the day. He had a small herd of cattle that he was building up carefully, breeding for quality rather than quantity. He had contracts with several buyers in Virginia City and Carson City, selling beef to the mining camps that still dotted the mountains. It was not making him rich, but it was honest work that allowed him to live independently on land he owned outright. "My father was a sharecropper in Missouri," Kyle told her one morning about a week after her arrival. "He worked land that would never be his, paid most of what he grew to the landowner, and never got ahead no matter how hard he worked. I left when I was 18, worked in the mines here in Nevada for 3 years until I had enough saved to buy this land. I swore I would never work for someone else's profit again if I could help it. This ranch, small as it is, belongs to me. No one can take it away." Rose heard the pride in his voice and understood it. She had spent her own years working in the textile factory, her hands bleeding from the machines, her lungs filling with lint, all to earn barely enough to survive. The idea of owning something, of working for herself rather than to enrich someone else, was a dream she had never dared to have. "It's a good life you've built here," she said softly. "It could be better," Kyle said, then seemed to hesitate. "I mean, if you wanted to, there are things we could do. The flower boxes on the porch have been empty since I built them. I had good intentions but no skill with flowers. And I always thought a vegetable garden would be nice, but I never had the time to tend one properly. But only if you wanted to. I'm not asking you to work. I just thought if you were looking for ways to pass the time." Rose considered this. The idea of working with growing things, of planting and tending and watching life unfold, was appealing in a way she had not expected. "I would like that," she said. "I've never had a garden before, but I'm willing to learn." Kyle's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger and somehow less weathered. "I'll take you to town tomorrow. Martha Collins at the general store can help you pick out seeds and starts. She has a garden that's the envy of everyone in the valley." The trip to town the next day was Rose's first real introduction to the community that would become her home. Coloma was small, just a main street with a collection of buildings clustered around it, but it was lively with the activity of ranchers and miners coming in for supplies. Kyle drove the wagon down the dusty street, nodding to people as they passed, and Rose noticed how many people smiled and waved at him. He was clearly well liked here. The general store was a large building packed with everything from tools to fabric to foodstuffs. Martha Collins, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a ready smile, greeted them warmly. "Kyle Yates, as I live and breathe. And you must be Rose. We've all been so curious to meet you. Welcome to Coloma, dear." Rose found herself enveloped in a brief but warm hug. Then Martha was pulling her deeper into the store, asking questions about her journey and exclaiming over her plans for a garden. Within minutes, Rose was surrounded by seed packets and small starter plants, with Martha offering advice on what would grow best in the Nevada soil and climate. "You'll want to plant your tomatoes on the south side where they'll get the most sun, but the lettuce will bolt if it gets too hot, so keep that in the shade of your porch. And these beans now, they're hardy and will produce all summer if you keep picking them. Kyle, are you listening? You'll need to build her some trellises for the beans and the peas." Kyle, who had been examining some horse tack on the other side of the store, came over with an amused expression. "Yes, madam, I'll get right on that. And you'll be coming to the church social next Sunday, won't you?" Martha continued, barely pausing for breath. "The whole valley comes out for it. It would be a wonderful chance for Rose to meet everyone properly." Rose felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of meeting so many strangers, but Kyle caught her eye and gave her a subtle shake of his head. "We'll see how Rose is feeling," he said diplomatically. "She's still settling in." Martha looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Kyle's expression must have conveyed more than his words did. Her face softened and she patted Rose's hand. "Of course, dear. There's no rush. The community will be here whenever you're ready, but you're welcome anytime. I want you to know that." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Rose found herself grateful once again for Kyle's understanding. He seemed to have an instinct for what she needed, giving her space when she needed it, but also gently encouraging her to engage with life again. Back at the ranch, Kyle spent the evening building raised beds for the garden while Rose sorted through the seeds and plants they had bought, reading the instructions on the packets by lamplight. It was peaceful work, and Rose found her mind drifting to plans and possibilities rather than dwelling on loss for the first time in weeks. Over the following days, they worked together on the garden. Kyle built the beds and the trellises, hauled rich soil from the bottomland near the creek, and set up a system of irrigation using water from the well. Rose planted the seeds and starter plants with careful attention, following Martha's instructions. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and gradually Rose began to feel something she had thought she might never feel again, a tentative sense of hope. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Rose was standing on the porch watering the flowers she had planted in the boxes. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and deep purple. Kyle came up beside her, his day's work done, and stood watching the sunset with her. "You've taken off your veil," he observed gently. Rose reached up to touch her bare head, realizing he was right. She had stopped wearing the heavy veil sometime in the past few days without even noticing. "I suppose I have," she said. "I'm glad," Kyle said. "Not that you shouldn't mourn your brother, but I like seeing your face. You have a beautiful smile, on the rare occasions when you let it show." Rose felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. She realized with some surprise that she had been smiling more often lately. The weight of grief had not lifted, but it had somehow become more bearable here in this wide valley with its endless sky and quiet rhythms. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, Kyle, for your patience and your kindness, for not demanding more than I could give, for making this place feel like it could become home." Kyle turned to look at her, and in his warm brown eyes Rose saw more than kindness. She saw something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster. "Rose," he said, his voice low and serious, "I know our arrangement was meant to be practical. A marriage of convenience, I think they call it. But I need to be honest with you. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you find your strength again, seeing you bring life to this ranch in ways I never could have alone. I've come to care for you, deeply. I know it's too soon, and I know you're still grieving, and I'm not asking for anything in return. I just needed you to know." Rose felt her breath catch. She looked up at this man who had shown her nothing but gentle respect, who had given her space to heal while also giving her reasons to hope. Somewhere along the way, without her quite realizing it, her feelings for him had deepened beyond gratitude or friendship. The thought of being his wife, truly his wife, no longer felt like an obligation or a sacrifice. It felt like a possibility that made her heart sing. "Kyle," she said, reaching out to take his hand. "It's not too soon. Or maybe it is by society's standards, but I don't care about that anymore. You've shown me more kindness in these 3 weeks than I knew existed in the world. You've given me hope when I thought I had none left. I care for you too. I think I've been falling in love with you a little more each day." The smile that spread across Kyle's face was like the sunrise, bright and full of promise. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then maybe we should talk about actually getting married, not because of our arrangement or because it's expected, but because we want to. Because we're building something real here together." "Yes," Rose said, and this time her smile came easily, naturally. "I would like that very much." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Coloma, with Martha and Henry Collins standing as witnesses and most of the valley in attendance. Rose wore a new dress, a pale blue calico that Martha had helped her pick out at the store, having gently suggested that perhaps it was time to set aside the mourning clothes. "Your brother would want you to be happy," Martha had said. "Grief is natural and right, but so is moving forward when the time comes. And dear, I think your time has come." Rose had cried a little when she folded away the black dresses, but they were not entirely tears of sadness. Daniel would have liked Kyle, she thought. He would have approved of this new life she was building, this hope she was allowing herself to feel. The wedding was simple but joyful. Reverend Thomas spoke about the importance of partnership and mutual respect in marriage, about building a life together through both hardship and happiness. When Kyle took Rose's hand and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. When Rose spoke hers, she meant every word. The community threw them a celebration after the ceremony, with tables of food set up in the churchyard and fiddle music that had people dancing as the sun set. Rose found herself swept up in the warmth of it all, meeting neighbors who welcomed her with genuine friendliness, accepting congratulations and good wishes from people who were already beginning to feel like friends. Kyle danced with her as the stars came out, holding her carefully as though she were something precious. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Yes," Rose said, and realized it was true. She was happy. Not in a way that erased her grief for Daniel, or pretended the pain of loss had never existed, but in a way that proved life could hold both sorrow and joy, that the human heart was vast enough to contain both. They drove home in the wagon under a sky full of stars, and for the first time Rose entered the ranch house as Kyle's wife in truth. He carried her over the threshold, making her laugh, then set her down gently in the parlor. "I don't want to rush anything," Kyle said, suddenly seeming nervous. "We can still take our time if you need to." But Rose shook her head, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I don't need more time," she said. "I need you." That night they came together with a tenderness that made Rose's heart ache in the best possible way. Kyle was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally lay together in the darkness, Rose's head on Kyle's chest listening to his heartbeat, she felt more at peace than she had since before Daniel's death. "I love you," Kyle whispered into her hair. "I love you too," Rose whispered back, and felt him smile against her temple. The summer passed in a haze of work and growing contentment. The garden flourished under Rose's care, providing them with fresh vegetables and the satisfaction of eating food they had grown themselves. The flower boxes bloomed with bright colors that made Rose smile every time she looked at them. Kyle's cattle herd grew, with several successful births that had him looking proud as any father. Rose found herself becoming part of the community in ways she had never experienced in Philadelphia. The women of the valley welcomed her into their informal network, inviting her to quilting bees and canning sessions where they worked together and shared recipes and advice. Martha Collins became a particular friend, her motherly warmth filling a void Rose had not realized she carried. The men of the valley respected Kyle and extended that respect to Rose, tipping their hats when they passed and always willing to lend a hand when needed. Rose learned that this was how people survived out here, by helping each other, by building a community that could withstand the hardships of ranch life and the unpredictability of the frontier. One afternoon in late July, Rose was working in the garden when she heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. She looked up to see Kyle riding hard from the far pasture, his face creased with worry. Her heart leaped into her throat. "What's wrong?" she called as he dismounted. "Spotted some tracks up by the north boundary," Kyle said, breathing hard. "Cat tracks, big ones. Mountain lion. I need to go check on the cattle, make sure none of them are vulnerable. It might be gone, but I can't take chances." "I'll come with you," Rose said immediately. Kyle hesitated, clearly torn between wanting her company and wanting her safe. "It could be dangerous," he said. "Then you should not go alone," Rose countered. "Besides, you've been teaching me to shoot. I'm a fair hand with a rifle now." That was true. Kyle had insisted on teaching her to handle firearms, saying that ranch life sometimes required it. Rose had discovered she had a good eye and a steady hand. More than that, she had discovered she liked the sense of competence it gave her. Kyle relented, and they rode out together to the north pasture. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they searched the area, looking for any signs of the mountain lion or for cattle that might be injured or threatened. They found the tracks Kyle had seen earlier, large paw prints pressed into the soft earth near the creek, but no sign of the cat itself. "Probably moved on," Kyle said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. "But we should keep watch for a few days, make sure." They were heading back toward the house when Rose spotted something in a dense thicket of brush. "Kyle, look, is that one of your calves?" Kyle turned his horse and they both saw it. A young calf, no more than a few weeks old, caught in the brambles. It was struggling weakly, making pitiful sounds of distress. Kyle dismounted quickly and moved toward the calf, speaking in a low, soothing voice. Rose stayed on her horse, rifle ready, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the mountain lion. If the calf was trapped and vulnerable, the cat might still be nearby, waiting for an easy meal. Kyle worked carefully to free the calf, untangling its legs from the thorny branches while trying not to hurt it further. The calf bellowed in fear and pain, and somewhere in the distance Rose heard an answering call from what must be its mother. "Almost got it," Kyle muttered, working his knife to cut away some of the tougher brambles. "Come on, little one. Easy now." Rose heard something, a rustle in the brush off to their left. She turned her horse in that direction, raising the rifle, her heart pounding. For a moment everything was still, then she saw it. A tawny shape moving through the shadows, low to the ground, muscles bunched and ready to spring. "Kyle," she said, her voice remarkably steady considering the fear coursing through her. "The cat. It's here." Kyle froze, then very deliberately continued working to free the calf, moving even more quickly now. "Can you see it clearly?" he asked quietly. "Not quite," Rose said, keeping the rifle trained on the area where she had seen movement. "It's in the shadows, but it's there." The mountain lion emerged from the brush then, a magnificent and terrifying creature, easily 6 feet long not counting its tail. It fixed its yellow eyes on the calf, on the easy prey it had probably been stalking for some time. Its muscles tensed, preparing to charge. Rose knew she had only a moment to act. She had never shot at anything living before, only at targets Kyle had set up for practice. But the thought of that beautiful deadly creature hurting Kyle or the helpless calf gave her courage she did not know she possessed. She took careful aim, accounting for distance and wind like Kyle had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, and the mountain lion leaped straight up in surprise, then turned and bolted back into the brush, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Rose's shot had struck the ground just in front of it, close enough to scare it off without hitting it. "Good shot," Kyle said, his voice full of pride and relief. He had managed to free the calf, which scrambled to its feet and ran off toward the sound of its mother's calls. "You probably saved that calf's life. Maybe mine too." Rose's hands were shaking now that the danger had passed, and she carefully lowered the rifle. "I was aiming to miss," she admitted. "I just wanted to scare it away." "Even better," Kyle said, mounting his horse again. "That cat was just following its nature. No need to kill it if we didn't have to. But you were ready to protect us, and that's what matters. You're quite a woman, Rose Yates." Rose felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, at the pride in his voice, at the way he looked at her like she had hung the moon. They rode back to the ranch together in the fading light, and that evening Kyle told the story of Rose's bravery to their neighbor Jacob Fletcher, who had stopped by to borrow a tool. By the next day, the whole valley knew how the new Mrs. Yates had faced down a mountain lion without flinching. Rose found the attention embarrassing but also oddly affirming. She had spent so much of her life feeling powerless, subject to the whims of factory owners and circumstance. Here, she was discovering strength she had not known she possessed. She was building a life with her own hands, tending her garden, protecting her home, becoming someone new while honoring who she had been. As summer turned to autumn, the valley transformed into a riot of color. The aspens on the mountainsides turned gold, and the air took on a crisp quality that made every breath feel clean and fresh. Rose and Kyle worked together to harvest the garden, preserving vegetables for the winter in the large root cellar Kyle had dug beneath the house. They canned tomatoes and beans, pickled cucumbers, and stored potatoes and carrots in sand. Rose found satisfaction in the work, in the knowledge that they were providing for themselves, that they would eat well through the winter because of their efforts. It was so different from her life in Philadelphia, where she had relied on the market and the grocer, always at the mercy of prices she could barely afford. One crisp October evening, Rose realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited a few more days to be sure, then another week, before she allowed herself to believe what her body was telling her. She was carrying Kyle's child. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of bringing a new life into the world with the man she loved. But also fear, because childbirth was dangerous and she had heard too many stories of women who did not survive it. And underneath it all, a bittersweet ache because Daniel would never meet his niece or nephew, would never know that his sister had found happiness after all. She told Kyle one evening after supper, simply and directly. "I'm with child," she said. "The baby should come in late spring, I think." Kyle's face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, joy, concern, and then a tenderness that made Rose's eyes sting with tears. He crossed to her in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Rose, that's wonderful. Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Rose said and realized it was true. "Yes, I'm happy, and scared, but happy." "I'll take care of you," Kyle promised. "We'll get the midwife from town to come out regularly to check on you. Whatever you need, Rose, it's yours." True to his word, Kyle brought Mrs. Sarah Morrison, the valley's midwife, out to the ranch the following week. Sarah was a competent woman in her 40s who had delivered most of the babies born in the valley over the past 2 decades. She examined Rose thoroughly and pronounced her healthy and strong. "You're young and fit from all the ranch work," Sarah said approvingly. "That will help when the time comes. Keep eating well, get plenty of rest, and try not to worry too much. I've delivered hundreds of babies, and the vast majority of mothers do just fine." Rose tried to follow Sarah's advice, though worry was hard to avoid entirely. But she was kept busy enough that she did not have time to dwell on her fears. As winter approached, there were preparations to be made. Firewood to be stacked, animals to be sheltered, supplies to be laid in against the possibility of being snowed in for weeks at a time. Kyle, already protective, became almost comically so as Rose's pregnancy progressed. He tried to do all the heavy work himself, insisting Rose rest, until she finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not an invalid, and that she needed to keep active or she would go mad from boredom. "The baby isn't due until May," she said firmly. "It's only November. I can still carry water and feed chickens and do my share of the work. I promise I won't lift anything too heavy or take foolish risks. But Kyle, I need to feel useful. I need to feel like I'm contributing." Kyle reluctantly agreed, though Rose noticed he still tried to intercept her whenever she reached for anything heavier than a bread basket. She found his protectiveness endearing even when it was excessive. The first snow came in early December, transforming the valley into a wonderland of white. Rose had never seen so much snow in Philadelphia, where it usually melted into gray slush within a day or two. Here it lay pristine and beautiful, muffling sound and making the world feel peaceful and intimate. They spent the long winter evenings by the fire, Kyle reading aloud from the books he had bought for her, while Rose knitted tiny garments for the baby. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Rose working on her knitting while Kyle repaired tack or carved small wooden toys that the baby would not be able to use for months yet. On Christmas, they exchanged simple gifts. Rose had made Kyle a new shirt from fabric she had traded some of her preserved vegetables for, sewing it with tiny, careful stitches. Kyle had built her a beautiful wooden rocking chair, perfectly sized for nursing a baby, with delicate carvings of flowers and vines along the arms. "Kyle, it's beautiful," Rose breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "When did you have time to make this?" "Been working on it in the barn when you were napping," Kyle admitted, looking pleased with her reaction. "I thought you might like something comfortable for when the baby comes." Rose kissed him soundly, then tested the chair, finding it perfectly balanced and comfortable. "It's the most wonderful gift I've ever received," she said honestly. They spent Christmas Day quietly together, cooking a good meal and counting their blessings. Rose thought of Christmases past, of Daniel and the small celebrations they had managed in their tiny Philadelphia apartment, and while the memory brought sadness, it no longer felt like an open wound. She could remember her brother with love and gratitude for the years they had together, while also embracing the new life she was building. Winter deepened, and there were days when the snow piled so high that they could not open the front door and had to go out through the barn instead. But the house was snug and well built, the firewood plentiful, and their stores of food more than adequate. Rose found she did not mind being snowbound. It gave her and Kyle time together, time to talk and dream and plan for the future. They chose names for the baby, debating options by firelight. For a boy, they settled on Daniel Kyle, honoring both Rose's lost brother and Kyle's father. For a girl, they chose Emma Catherine, names that Rose simply liked the sound of. "I hope the baby has your eyes," Rose said one evening, nestled against Kyle's side on the sofa. "They're such a warm brown like honey in sunlight." "I hope the baby has your courage," Kyle countered, "and your strength. You're the strongest person I know, Rose." Rose laughed softly. "I don't feel very strong. I feel tired and my ankles are swelling and I cannot see my own feet anymore." "You're growing a whole new person," Kyle said, placing his hand gently on her rounded belly. "That's the strongest thing anyone can do." The baby kicked against Kyle's palm and he laughed in delight. These movements, which had started as small flutters and grown to definite pushes and rolls, never failed to amaze them both. There was a person in there, their child, waiting to be born. Spring came slowly to the Nevada mountains, with false starts and late snows that had Rose despairing that winter would never end. But finally, in early April, the snow began to melt in earnest, the creek swelled with runoff, and the first brave shoots of green appeared in Rose's garden beds. Rose was enormously pregnant now, moving slowly and carefully, her back aching and her patience wearing thin. She was ready for this baby to be born, ready to meet the child she had been carrying for so long. But Sarah Morrison, when she came to check on Rose, declared that the baby would come when it was ready and not a moment before. "First babies take their time," she said serenely. "Could be another few weeks yet. Try to rest and keep your strength up." Rose tried, but resting was difficult when she was so uncomfortable. She took to walking around the ranch in the evenings, hoping the movement might encourage the baby to make its appearance. Kyle walked with her, attentive and supportive, ready to catch her if she stumbled. On a warm evening in late April, with the sun painting the mountains gold and the first wildflowers blooming in the meadow, Rose felt the first unmistakable pains of labor. She gripped Kyle's arm, breathing through the contraction, then looked up at him with wide eyes. "I think it's time," she said. Kyle went pale, then flushed, then seemed to gather himself. "Right, okay, let me get you inside and then I'll ride for Sarah." He helped Rose back to the house and settled her in their bedroom, then rode hard for town. Sarah arrived within 2 hours, calm and competent, bringing with her the supplies and experience of dozens of births. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Rose had known it would be painful, but the reality was beyond anything she had imagined. Wave after wave of contractions racked her body, and between them, she could only rest and gather her strength for the next onslaught. Kyle stayed with her the whole time, despite Sarah's initial suggestion that he might be more comfortable waiting elsewhere. He held Rose's hand, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, and spoke words of encouragement that she clung to like a lifeline. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You're so strong, Rose, just a little longer. I'm right here with you." Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the window, Sarah announced that it was time to push. Rose bore down with all her remaining strength, pushed until she thought she might break in half. And then suddenly there was a release and a wail, thin and angry and absolutely beautiful. "It's a boy," Sarah announced, lifting the red-faced, squalling infant for them to see. "A healthy boy with good lungs and all his fingers and toes." She cleaned the baby quickly and efficiently, then placed him in Rose's arms. Rose looked down at her son, at his tiny perfect face, and his eyes squinted against the unfamiliar light, and felt her heart expand with a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "Daniel," she whispered, touching his soft cheek with one finger. "Daniel Kyle Yates." "Welcome to the world, little one." Kyle was crying unashamedly, tears running down his weathered face as he looked at his wife and new son. "He's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Rose, you did it. You were so brave. I'm so proud of you." Rose was too exhausted to cry, but she smiled up at Kyle with more happiness than she had ever thought she would feel again. "We did it," she corrected. "We made him together. He's ours, Kyle, our son." The days that followed were a blur of sleeplessness and wonder. Daniel was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, but still Rose found herself in a constant state of exhaustion. Her body ached from the birth, her breasts were sore, and she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of keeping this tiny person alive. But she was not alone. Kyle helped with everything, changing soiled cloths and walking the floor with Daniel when he fussed, bringing Rose food and drink, and telling her she was doing wonderfully even when she felt like she was failing at everything. The community rallied around them as well. Martha Collins organized a parade of women who brought meals and advice, held the baby so Rose could rest, and reassured her that what she was feeling was normal and would pass. Sarah Morrison stopped by regularly to check on both Rose and the baby, pronouncing them both healthy and thriving. Slowly, Rose adjusted to motherhood. She learned Daniel's cries, learned what he needed and when. She learned to feed him while half asleep, to function on fragmented rest, to find joy in his small milestones. His first smile, given to her one morning when he was 6 weeks old, made every sleepless night worthwhile. Kyle was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. Rose would come in from the garden to find him lying on the floor with Daniel on his chest, talking to the baby about cattle and horses, and the beauty of the valley they lived in. He had made a crib with the same care he had made Rose's rocking chair, and he had carved a set of wooden horses that Daniel was still too young to play with, but that hung above his bed, turning slowly in the breeze from the window. Summer came again, the garden flourished, and Rose found herself settling into the rhythms of life with a child. It was harder than she had imagined, but also more rewarding. When Daniel laughed for the first time, a gurgling chuckle that lit up his whole face, Rose felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "I wish my brother could see him," she said to Kyle one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Daniel slept in her arms. "Tell me about him," Kyle said gently. "Tell me about your brother Daniel, who this little one is named for." So Rose did. She told Kyle about growing up with Daniel, about how he had protected her when their parents died, about his dreams of being a carpenter and his kindness and his quick smile. She talked about missing him, about wishing he could have known Kyle and seen the life she had built. "He would have liked you," she said. "He would have been happy to know I found someone who treats me with such kindness and respect. He would have loved being an uncle." "I wish I could have known him," Kyle said sincerely. "Any brother of yours would have been someone worth knowing. But Rose, I think he can see. Wherever he is, I think he knows you're happy. I think he knows his nephew and is proud of the name he bears." Rose chose to believe that. She chose to believe that Daniel was somehow watching over them, that her happiness would have made him happy, that the sorrow of his loss did not diminish the joy of her present. Daniel grew quickly, as babies do. He learned to roll over, then to sit up, then to crawl with determination across the floor in pursuit of the carved wooden horses Kyle had made. Rose baby-proofed the house as best she could, moving anything dangerous or valuable out of reach, accepting that a certain amount of chaos was now part of their lives. On Daniel's first birthday, in late April, they had a small celebration with their closest neighbors. Martha Collins brought a cake she had baked, and Daniel smashed his hands into it with glee, getting more on his face than in his mouth. Everyone laughed, and Rose took a mental picture of the moment, wanting to remember it forever. "Have you thought about giving him a brother or sister?" Martha asked Rose privately, helping clean up after the party. "You're young yet, plenty of time for more babies." Rose had thought about it. She and Kyle had resumed their intimate relationship a few months after Daniel's birth, and they were not taking any precautions against pregnancy. But so far, no second child had been conceived. "If it happens, it happens," Rose said. "I would love more children, but I'm content with what I have. Kyle and Daniel are more than I ever dared to dream of." "You deserve every bit of happiness you have," Martha said firmly. "You've worked hard for it, both of you. This valley is better for having you in it." Life continued in its pleasant rhythm. Daniel learned to walk, taking his first wobbly steps from Rose to Kyle in the parlor, both parents cheering him on with exaggerated enthusiasm. He learned to say "mama" and "dada" and "horse" and "no," the last of which quickly became his favorite word. Rose's garden expanded each year as she gained more confidence and skill. She started growing herbs and flowers to sell at the general store, discovering she had a talent for growing things. The money she made was hers to keep, and she carefully saved it, taking pride in her own earnings. Kyle's ranch prospered as well. His careful breeding program was paying off with cattle that brought premium prices. He was able to hire help during the busy seasons, young men from town who wanted to learn ranching and were willing to work hard for fair wages. Kyle treated them well, just as he treated everyone well, and they were loyal in return. On a warm summer evening when Daniel was 2 years old, Rose was putting the boy to bed when she felt a familiar flutter in her belly. She froze, her hand going to her stomach, waiting to see if she felt it again. There it was, a gentle movement like butterfly wings. She finished tucking Daniel in, kissed his forehead as he drowsed off to sleep, then went to find Kyle. He was on the porch, watching the stars come out. "Kyle," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly, "we're going to have another baby." Kyle's face lit up with joy and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Rose, that's wonderful. Are you happy?" "So happy," Rose said, and meant it with her whole heart. "Our family is growing." The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Perhaps because Rose knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was kept busy chasing a toddler and maintaining the household. Daniel would have a brother or sister by the following spring, and Rose found herself hoping for a girl this time, someone to balance out their little family. She was right. Emma Catherine Yates was born on a cool March morning, her arrival much quicker than her brother's had been. She came into the world with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair, and when Rose held her for the first time, she felt that same overwhelming rush of love she had felt with Daniel. "A daughter," Kyle said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a daughter, Rose." Daniel, now a curious and energetic 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, to hold her, to show her all his toys. Rose and Kyle supervised these interactions carefully, but they need not have worried. Daniel was gentle with Emma, seeming to understand instinctively that she was small and fragile and needed protecting. "My baby," Daniel would say proudly to anyone who visited. "My Emma." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the small milestones of children growing and a marriage deepening into something unshakable. Emma learned to walk and talk, developing a sunny personality that made everyone smile. Daniel grew into a responsible older brother, helping his father with ranch chores and learning to ride his own pony. Rose and Kyle worked side by side through good years and hard ones, through droughts that tested their resources and winters that tested their endurance. They supported each other through challenges and celebrated victories together, building a partnership based on mutual respect and deep love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kyle gave Rose a gift that made her cry. It was a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Carson City, based on a photograph they had taken the previous year. It showed the four of them in front of the ranch house. Kyle tall and proud, Rose with her hand on his arm, Daniel at 9 years old already showing signs of the man he would become, and Emma at 7 with her bright smile and dancing eyes. "I wanted to capture this moment," Kyle said as Rose studied the painting. "Our family, our home, everything we've built together. I look at this and I see the luckiest man alive." "I'm the lucky one," Rose said, wiping her eyes. "You gave me a reason to live again when I thought I had none. You showed me that joy could exist alongside grief, that it was possible to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. I love you, Kyle Yates. I love the life we've made together." Kyle pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the home they had created, surrounded by evidence of their love and hard work. The flower boxes Rose had first planted 10 years ago still bloomed every spring. The garden that had started as an experiment now fed not just their family but much of the valley. The ranch had grown from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the region. But more than material success, they had built a family. They had raised children who knew they were loved, who understood the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. They had become integral parts of the community, hosting celebrations and helping neighbors and contributing to the life of the valley. Rose thought sometimes about the woman who had stepped off that train 12 years ago, draped in black and hollowed out by grief. That woman had felt like she had reached the end of everything. She had traveled west not with hope but with desperate necessity, unable to imagine a future that held anything but loneliness and survival. How wrong she had been. How gloriously, wonderfully wrong. Here in this valley with its wide skies and clean air, she had found more than survival. She had found purpose and community and love beyond anything she had imagined possible. She had found a partner who saw her strength even when she could not see it herself, who had given her the space to grieve and the reasons to hope. Daniel grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Kyle's joints began to protest the hard physical labor of ranching. He courted a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Lucy Hamilton, and when he was 21 he married her in the same small church where Rose and Kyle had wed. Emma, bright and determined, announced at 15 that she wanted to become a teacher. She studied diligently, traveling to Carson City to take the examination, and returned at 18 certified to teach. The valley built a new schoolhouse, larger than the old one, and Emma became its first teacher, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. Rose and Kyle grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces marked by years of sun and wind and laughter. They added on to the house as Daniel and Lucy's children began arriving, creating space for the grandchildren who filled the home with noise and energy. On a cool spring evening when Rose was 55 years old, she and Kyle sat on the porch that had been the site of so many important moments in their life together. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening breeze. Daniel and Lucy were inside preparing supper, and Emma was at the schoolhouse preparing lessons for the next day. "You ever regret it?" Kyle asked, taking Rose's hand. "Answering my advertisement, coming west." Rose looked at this man who had been her partner for more than 3 decades, who had shown her every day what love looked like, who had given her a life richer than anything she could have imagined. She thought about the frightened, grieving woman who had stepped off the train in mourning clothes, and the woman she had become through his gentle encouragement and steadfast love. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me reasons to smile again, Kyle. You gave me everything." Kyle lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with the same tenderness he had always shown her. "You gave me everything too," he said. "A home, a family, a purpose. You made this house a home. You made my life complete." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the brilliant colors Rose had learned to love. Around them was the evidence of a life well lived. The garden still flourishing after all these years, the house that had sheltered their family through joys and sorrows, the land they had worked with their own hands. But more important than any of that was what they had built together. A love that had weathered every storm, a family that carried their legacy forward, a partnership that had proven stronger than grief or hardship or time itself. Rose had come west in mourning, her heart heavy with loss. But she had found in this valley and in Kyle's arms that love was not a finite resource, that the heart could expand to hold both sorrow and joy, memory and hope, grief and gladness. She had learned to smile again, and in doing so had discovered that happiness was not a betrayal of those she had lost, but rather a celebration of everything they had taught her about resilience and hope. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rose leaned her head on Kyle's shoulder, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. It was more than enough. It was everything.